Welcome to this third class in the series on quantum spirituality, evolving your relationship with the universe. And we've been talking about how science has shown what mysticism has been saying for a very long time, that reality is totally interconnected. Everything is interconnected with everything else, and everything potentially has an impact on everything else. So we might think that we can just sit on the sidelines and kind of watch things go by or study things separate, but that's really not possible. In fact, the only way that we know and understand things is by virtue of our relationship with whatever it is that we're experiencing. So, if spirituality is going to be of any benefit, it has to be something useful in real life, in walking around in the world. It can't be, as sometimes it is, an escape from reality, an ascent to some blissful place that doesn't have anything to do with the struggles of day-to-day life. It has to be something that's going to further the transformation of what goes on in the world. And part of the title of this series is Evolving Your Relationship with the Universe. And that comes from the reality that we live in a universe that is constantly in a state of evolution. And scientists have realized this. Mysticism's tendency over the centuries has not been evolutionary. It's been to go to a transcendent reality apart from what's here. That this was either seen as illusory or a distraction or something that keeps people from realizing their true purpose in life. And now the tendency in many people in spirituality is to realize that the whole point of everything is the further evolution of everything in existence. And existence doesn't just mean the world that we perceive with our physical senses. Existence means all the levels on which reality takes place. And both science and mysticism is saying that there are multiple levels of reality, many of which are not perceivable by the usual physical senses. So scientists are theorizing that there may be 10 dimensions, there may be 21 dimensions, and the explanation for why don't we perceive these other dimensions is they may be very tiny and they're curled up inside of the usual 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time. And different spiritual and mystical traditions talk about other realms of existence, oftentimes described as the angelic realm. And Sufis talk about the jinn realm, the realm of pure genius, and so on. And these are realities that many people have experienced over the centuries. And the Sufis say that the human, is the only being in all of existence that exists in all of these realms simultaneously. But our consciousness, for most people, is limited to the physical world. So we don't know about these other realms, or if we believe in them, just because someone's told us about them, we don't have any direct experience of them. And occasionally people will have mystical experiences and where they don't have any doubt that there are other levels on which we exist. Last week I talked about research that's been done, particularly by William Tiller, who has demonstrated that if you do something that brings subtle energy into ordinary, what he calls ordinary reality, it opens up new possibilities that previously were not present. So the usual equations of physics, which have been considered as immutable laws, are changed, and now there's other things that become possible that from our ordinary point of view might seem miraculous, or we might think, well, that didn't really happen, that's impossible, because I know that this is all that there is, what I can see and what I can measure. Well, that sounds interesting, but what does that have to do with us bringing about transformation in our life and in the world? Well, I thought we would do a few experiences today so we can sample what this is like. Okay? So, I talked last time, so you might think of some of the previous classes as been laying a foundation, maybe a theoretical foundation. So today is going to be getting into, well, how can we apply this and experience this? So I talked last time about when there's a group of people who are all aligned in their consciousness, and you add one more who's in alignment, the contribution of that one more person is twice as many as multiply. If there's 100 people, then that additional one is 200 times as much as any one individual separate. Okay, so we have 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19, we have 20 people here. So we're going to do a little experiment where we're all going to try some little concentrations and see if we can feel a palpable difference in the atmosphere of the room, not just in ourselves, but what the room feels like. Okay, and you don't have to be an advanced meditator, used to experiencing transcendent states of consciousness. In fact, you don't ever have to have meditated before in your life. This is very easy. Sometimes spirituality is made out to be so complicated, and it's really not. In fact, Hazrat Inayat Khan, who brought Sufism to the West, said that there are temples in India that you have to do rituals and go around the temple perhaps 100 times doing these prayers and chants before you can go in. And he said the purpose of that is just for the person to let go of their usual way of thinking so they can really be open to an experience. If they were in that state already, they could just walk right in. Okay? So, let's close our eyes and just become fully present to being here, to sitting in the chair, to your breathing, to the sound of the words that I'm saying. And other thoughts will probably come about earlier in the day and later in the day and so on, and you don't have to fight them off, just let them go by, like they're just in the background. And you're just going to focus your attention on what I'm going to ask you to do in just a moment. So let's begin by just breathing in the word peace. And if you like, you can use a word for peace in another language, salam, shalom, or just the word peace. And just think of that word on the inhalation and feel like you're just taking in feelings of peace. And you're letting yourself enter a very peaceful state of being. It's like the calm beneath the surface storm. And now feel yourself in alignment with any being in the world right now, or even beings in other realms who are focusing on peace, sending prayers for peace. And you're joining them. You're joining that intention for peace. And you're just allowing yourself to enter into that stream of peace so that it becomes pervading throughout all the levels of existence, including this world. And perhaps you'll feel kind of a little nibble, a change in sensation, a change of energy in your body. And just open to that. You can use that to orient towards going more deeply into this awareness of peace being all-pervading. And it's not as if you're broadcasting it out, you're opening to peace suffusing all of existence. It's coming from everywhere like a perfume. Now imagine that you can highlight different areas in the world where there's war, there's conflict, there's dissension. And by just directing your consciousness to those places, it's like you're highlighting them, and it increases the amplitude of this feeling of peace pervading that area or that situation. And there's a wonderful, simple Buddhist prayer that's kind of fill in the blank. So this one would be, and you can think it as I say it, with the thought of peace, let us encompass the world. And may that peace, increasing without measure, encompass the whole universe up to its confine. Okay, now release your focus on peace, but know that that intention will continue. You don't have to keep thinking about it. It's like you've primed the pump and it's just going. And now think about a quality that you feel in need of right now. It could be healing, it could be understanding, it could be compassion, it could be strength, it could be mastery, it could be insight. And whatever that quality that you feel in need of, just feel like you're tuning into the universe from your heart, which the mystics say is vaster than the whole universe. And you're opening your heart with the desire to receive this quality that you feel a need for. And again, you don't have to just keep repeating it, the intention, you put it out and trust that because we live in a deeply interconnected reality, interconnected through all the realms of existence, that there's a response to your desire of your heart, and feel yourself receiving in abundance that quality that you feel in need of. And feel it just stirring in your being, awakening. You might feel it as an energy descending, but you might feel it as an energy just arising from the very cells of your body, filled with that quality that you've asked for. And just like even scientists for some decades now have postulated that the earth is a living being, Gaia, then this universe we live in is a living being on a scale beyond imagination. And we might call this being by different names, but we are an integral part, a unique manifestation of this being. We might call it God, we might call it the One, we might call it the universe. But feel the response from this grand living being to the desire of your heart, pouring into you the fulfillment of your desire for this quality. And then gently bring your awareness to being here in this room or wherever you're listening to this recording. And gently open your eyes when you're ready. And just notice how perhaps you feel different, even physically different, perhaps mentally and emotionally different, and how the environment around you, the room that you're in, perhaps feels very different than it did when you started these little concentrations. And if you notice a change, perhaps a significant change, then just step back and take a look. All you did was shift your consciousness in a particular direction with a particular intention, and you opened to that intention, and you got into a receptive state of being, and you just allowed yourself to experience the fruit of that desire. Well, couldn't get much simpler than that. So, when we go around through our day, we're in contact with lots of people. We're in contact with lots of different environments, perhaps stores, driving in traffic, wherever we are, and we can allow ourselves to become kind of a beacon, only not a broadcasting beacon, but a hub, perhaps, of opening up wonderful energy wherever we go. And we're not trying to push anything on to anybody. We're not trying to grit our teeth and send something out. We're just allowing ourselves to experience a particular quality that perhaps we feel either that we need in that particular circumstance, or perhaps we feel is needed in that particular circumstance, and we're just opening and allowing it to manifest and become present. And when we do that, guess what? We have just brought subtle energy to ordinary reality, and now we've opened up new possibilities to take place that were not on the table before. And just that simple little shift, maybe it's smiling at somebody, maybe it's just a glance. And what's really interesting is, yes, we can do this with people, and that's wonderful, but we can do this just walking out in nature, and we can feel a communion with whatever's around us, whether it's plants or whether it's birds. We can experience our interconnectedness with those. We can experience a circulation of light that takes place between us and whatever we're experiencing in nature, and everything has got its unique flavor of light that it puts out. Each of us has that. Every bird has that. Every blade of grass has that. And when there's an interplay between that light and the light of our being, now something becomes available to both sides that was not available before. It's not just us noticing. One way of thinking about this would be, well, we're seeing the deeper reality of what's out there. Yes, we are, but we couldn't do that unless we were experiencing a state of the deeper reality of our own being, and in that state, we're inhabiting, dwelling in a different world than we were in before. It looks similar, but it's become transformed. And I know we've all had experiences like this where it could just be a day when you're in a wonderful mood and you're just going around and everything seems full of light. And the opposite days you get up and go, oh God, and things seem pretty dark. Well, we carry our atmosphere with us, and we always have the capacity of changing the atmosphere in ourselves and being a catalyst to change the atmosphere of what's around us. So now I'd like to do a little segue into science. There was I don't know if he was a mathematician or a physicist named Bekenstein, and he proved this thing called Bekenstein's bound. And some of you have heard me describe this before, but some of you haven't. So an example of this is, he showed whenever there's an interface between two things, The interface is the means of communication. There's a finite limit to how much information can go in either direction, and it's directly proportional to how big the screen is. So that's why, guys, we need to get an 84-inch TV. Not really. So an example of this would be, I bring you into my laboratory and I say, please have a seat, and I'm going to sit you in front of this computer terminal. And we're really lucky because usually God's way too busy to deal with stuff like this, but got a break in God's schedule. So God's agreed to have a conversation with you through this computer, so you can type in whatever you want and then God will respond. Well, according to Bekenstein's bound, there's a limit to how much information you could communicate with God, but there's also a limit to how much God can know about about you. God can't know infinite because it won't fit, and vice versa. So, thinking about this, and I had this realization some years ago, if we can increase the size of our screen, then more can transpire between our manifest self and our transcendent self, whatever you want to call the transcendent, God, your personal Lord, your personal angel, whatever you want to call it, the universe, the quantum vacuum. And the way that we can increase the size of that interface is awakening to the broader extent on which we really exist. So if our awareness is just limited to our physical sense of self in this life at a certain age, on a certain date, in a certain space, in a certain time, our physical body, all the thoughts in our mind, the feelings in our heart, that's pretty limited compared to what could be. But if we take to heart what the scientists are saying, well, if there's multiple dimensions, then we must exist in those as well. What the mystics are saying with their descriptions of subtle realms, and they're divided many different ways, in different religions. There might be 7 of them, 14 of them, this or that. Buddhism's got a whole bunch of them. But these are just, it's like dividing up the color spectrum. There's probably an infinite number of ways you could identify these colors, but we're used to certain ones, and other cultures are used to other ones. And so in the different mystical traditions, and based on the religious tradition that they arose from, historically there have been like different vibrational levels that have been parceled out particular to that one, and different ones for Judaism and Christianity, although there's similarities, and Islam and so on. But all of them are there. Just like on the radio dial, we can tune into many, many different frequencies, but there's like the usual ones, the major channels, okay? So if we can have ways of experiencing ourselves even as simultaneously existing in one other of these realms at the same time that we're aware of our physical existence, and we can feel a circulation of light between those two, now when we come to this interface between the manifest and the transcendent, there's exponentially more that can come through in both directions. So now we become capable of understanding reality much more so than would ever be possible from our limited sense of existence. I've said before that the Sufis say that creation took place because God was a hidden treasure desiring to know and to be known, and God could only know through the relationship with beings in existence. And so the Sufis would say, well, our purpose in life is to contribute to that divine awakening in life, and we can give a heck of a lot more back if we awaken to the much deeper and broader multidimensional reality on which we exist. You could say that's one way of fulfilling our purpose in the world. And it's beyond the scope of this class to try to go into a lot of there's techniques to awaken to awareness of, let's say, the angelic realm, and to experience a circulation between that realm and this realm. But suffice it to say, even if we just hold the thought, even if we believe it, even if we haven't had an experience of it, and what would be necessary to believe is, yes, I trust these great beings who have said we do exist in these other realms, but our consciousness is latent and dormant. It's like the baby has to learn how to function and come to a separate sense of identity in the world to eventually be able to enter a spiritual path of awakening. First you have to realize that you exist as a separate being before you can realize that you exist as an interconnected, integral part of the total reality. So if you just believe that, and the mystics say, for instance, that we have an angelic body as well as our physical body, and we usually think of these things as being inside of ourselves, but they say the angelic body is vastly bigger than this physical body. So you can just take it as a hypothesis. Well, what if this is true? I'm just going to imagine that I have an angelic body as well as this. And I'm going to, just like we did the little experiment earlier, holding on to peace and so on, you could sit with an intention. I'd like to be able to experience something of what this angelic realm that I exist on is like, even though I've been asleep there, so to speak. And you don't have to know what to do. You just put that out there and you get into a receptive state of being and wait for something to happen. And chances are something will, especially if you're not too impatient, because if you're too impatient, you're going to, nothing's happening. And the more you do that, the less is going to happen. So, in fact, a lot of times the reason for doing meditation practices, mantras, or in Sufism they're called waza'if, many times, is to tire out our usual mind to eventually just let's go. And then you can experience something that's been there all along, but it's been clouded over by our usual onslaught of thoughts that go on throughout the day. So these are ways that we can have practical applications of spirituality in our day-to-day life. So let's try one more. Think of someone that you have difficulty with. I don't think anyone will have any trouble with this, but if you do, think of someone you wish they would just somehow just go away or move far away and you'd never have to deal with them again. It could be someone present in your life, or if you're retired, it might be a boss that you used to have. Oh, this person was just awful. Or just someone that just really grated at you. And I'd be surprised if you can't come up with at least one. Okay, so close your eyes and imagine a circumstance when you were dealing with this person. And first you're feeling whatever you felt, which was probably judgment and anger and not good feelings, and probably not feelings that made you feel open to a deeper reality. It probably made you feel constricted and separated and wanted to push away from that circumstance. So that's just a starting point, okay? So now freeze frame the memory of this and imagine you can, like you're watching a movie of it, a replay, and you can step outside the movie, and now you can start asking yourself some questions or contemplating some questions. And it could be, perhaps there's some things about this person that I don't know, didn't know about, or I don't know about, and it could be, well, I have no idea what their personal life is like, or their family life is like, or what they've been through in the past, and perhaps they were horribly abused, or perhaps they just had parents that didn't know how to be loving, that were just always critical, or perhaps they've had just traumas that happened to them in life that they haven't healed from, and because of that, they developed a personality that just wants to push people away and who's just very mad at the world and angry. And because they've been like that for so long, everybody projects onto them that that's how they are, and they project all their negativity on them, which reinforces that person's negative image of themselves. Okay. But now as you stop to think, well, what if they had been through things like this? And imagine that you could step into their consciousness and you feel hurt and wounded, and perhaps you've been abandoned, and why couldn't I be happy like other people? And you just see this other side of them. And you also trust that every soul inherently is divine and pure. And this person's personality structure has gotten so disconnected from the deeper reality of their being that they never knew this, or if they ever did, they've forgotten about it. And other people don't see this in them, but you can serve as a catalyst to them, just in your way of relating to them. So step back into the scene of whatever event you have in your memory banks where you were reacting, and go, well, wait a minute, take a breath. Now I'm going to look at this person with compassion, and I'm going to see past all the negativity that they broadcast, the looks that they give, the words that they say, the tone of their voice. And I'm going to see this part of them that's way below the surface, which is filled with light, which is a unique manifestation of the divine being, the one being, a unique expression of the universe with a capital U, expressing through them. And that's what you're going to see. And you feel like you're connecting with that in your heart. And you don't have to say any of this to that person. They probably go, what are you trying to do? You're just perceiving this in your way of relating to them. And now you're no longer reacting to them, even though they might still be broadcasting the same negativity. And this won't be an instantaneous change in them, and you can't really count on any change in particular. But I can share with you, when I was in my psychology practice and I'd have people complaining about their boss, I'd say, try this experiment and keep it going for a while, a couple of weeks, a month in your dealings, let's say, with your boss. And I never had one client that wouldn't come back and say, I don't understand it, but my boss all of a sudden is being nice to me and they're still horrible with everybody else. Well, the reason for that is when the boss is around you and you're doing that, they can feel something different in themselves that they couldn't feel before. When they're around most everybody else, they're caught up in their projections, other people's projections onto them. But you have really planted a seed in that person for them to be able to transform. And you're not laying any trip on them. You're not trying to force good energy onto them. You're just seeing past the surface and connecting on a level where light is free to circulate instead of being blocked by thoughts and by emotions. So we can bring transformation about. I like to say that every situation without exception is potentially a portal to the sacred. And that does not mean there are not absolutely horrible situations. I mean, just on the news lately, these mass shootings, I mean, it's just unbelievable. But even those, what can come from that and the people's way of responding to them, or even during and afterwards, can somehow bring some subtle energy that can serve as a kind of a healing, but also maybe laying the groundwork for a potential for change to take place. And if enough people start doing that, eventually something is going to change. It's going to hit critical mass. But it won't happen through the efforts of no matter how many people thinking that they're just disconnected in their efforts. When people feel like they're aligning their intentions with other people that have that deeper state of consciousness, there's a great power in that. So we can bring about transformation in the world, and I think for a lot of circumstances that's really the only hope for transformation like that to take place. So I'd like to take some time to see if you have questions, and again, because this is being recorded, I'd ask if you have a question, just come up, because the microphone's up here and it won't pick up from back there. But any questions about what I've talked about today, or from either of the first two classes, I would welcome those. And we'll let the choir go first if they have any, because I know they have to go in 5 minutes. So anybody in the choir have anything they want to bring up or ask about? And there's no such thing as a dumb question. If you've got a question, probably somebody else does too. Or anybody else that has a question you'd like to ask. Just talk from here.
Yeah. The last class, I can't remember how you said this, but something about when we're praying for someone, another person, and you brought in, at least for me, if I understood, God me and that other person in a real particular way, which was very beautiful, but I can't remember it, and I don't know if you can. That's the question.
Well, when you're praying for someone, you're aligning your intention with something deeper than just the way you've thought about yourself as a separated being. And so how you think about the result of that, I mean, you could think of it as you're praying to God and God is doing something, which is perfectly fine and valid. Or you could also think, well, I am deeply interconnected with everything, including this person. So I'm going to feel a oneness with this person, and I'm going to open to an intention of them being able to receive whatever it is that they need. And the Sufis would, in healing in particular, we feel like it's important to ask someone if they'd like to receive healing prayers. It's going to be much more likely they'll have a benefit. But you could have just more general prayers, even if you can't talk to that person, and you're just opening up, like we did in the concentration at the first part of this class, to allowing that what's needed to be present, to become available, a particular flavor of light circulating through existence that that person can receive. Okay? Anybody else?
So I love how you talk about, I already know him, so about time, and that we can actually increase our surface area by extending back in time and forward in time. What do you want to say about that?
Okay, good question. So part of our limited sense of identity is the illusion that our existence is limited to ourselves going through linear time. So all of you is here at this particular day and time listening to me talk. But our existence is continuing in the past, and even in physics they're talking about theories like this, perhaps into the future, like there's multiple histories, there's multiple pathways of time and so on. The Buddha, when the Buddha had his enlightenment, described past lives of being an insect and animals and different realms and all of this, was aware of all of that. Well, imagine if you could step outside of the limitations of just three dimensions of space and one of time, and you could perceive all the times that you've been just all out there, and they're all evolving, they're all contributing to all the other times. Now, if you put out an intention, the effect of that is not just limited to this moment of time, going to something else at this particular moment in time, but it can have an effect other times that have been. And not that if someone's had a horrible traumatic experience in the past, you can't, do this and it won't have happened, but you can bring some healing to the past. You can bring about transformation, and the effect of that is felt in the present. And some of you have done a meditation which I call tuning into your illuminated self of the future, where if you believe that at some point, like the mystics say, everything's going to awaken, even atoms. Well, if you think that that's true, then you just imagine some point in the undefined future you'll be illuminated, and you imagine that, and you imagine your illuminated self thinking about you in the present, but then you come back to the you in the present, realizing you can partake of the wisdom of that future illuminated self right now. So you're kind of joining together these different times. So we're not limited by space or time, but it's a very powerful illusion. Jonathan, I know you had some questions, I think.
Just to tag on what you just said, in the Christian tradition, there's a theologian named Paul Tillich who talks about time, and he plays around with the idea, early 20th century theologian, of time fullness, kairos, and rejecting the idea of chronos, time, that has a very linear sense, but that the fullness of time And in the world of Christianity, when we talk about eschatology, when is the fullness of God's presence going to be made known, or when do the end times come? There's an invitation to consider that that's not a linear concept, that might be a more, to use Doctor Who, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey concept that is always kind of flowing in and around, and that there might be a realized eschatology, that the time is always full and is always being made manifest at the same time as it's always unfolding. So that part of what you and I do together is talk about the linkages and how you speak about it and how many, what we might call classic Christians, speak about it as well. There's more linkages than not, and that's really cool. I dig that a lot. My question is purpose. How would you then, you hinted at purpose a bit ago, and one question I have with that is, what is the purpose of human existence? And you got 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I better get out ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. So, well, one word for purpose in Hinduism and Buddhism is dharma, our purpose in life. And so the Sufis would say our purpose is to contribute to the awakening of divinity, however we think of divinity, in existence. And existence is not just limited to the way we usually think about the world. And then how that takes place is by fulfilling our unique dharma, which means being a way of being in the world that through our way of being, through our way of relating to whatever we're experiencing, it is opening up more and more possibilities of what can be known, and what could be known only through us. Each of us has things that can only be known through us, and then each of us has things that could only be known by our connection with anything that we're in relationship with. And those two things in connection now have wisdom that can only come through that pairing. So the Sufis would say, at least some Sufis, that what we think of as God is always evolving. It's not static. That the wisdom, there's no end to wisdom. And so if I was going to give a short answer to the purpose, it would be that we're contributing towards the greater and greater expression of wisdom on all the levels of existence that can only come through each of us uniquely. And the way we do that is not necessarily through sitting and meditating. It could be whatever our natural deep passion is for being in the world, those things that make us feel the most alive. Then we are fulfilling our purpose. And what can come from that, even Arby, who I've talked about, comes from our unique bi-unity, bi-unity, human-divine relationship, that what is created from that could never happen just from what we think of as the divine side by itself, could never happen from what we think of as the human side by itself. It can only happen through the relationship of those two sides that are birthing something new into existence that's never been before. So that's my quick answer, and I think we are out of time. Thank you.